The day I discovered my husband had stolen our daughter's college fund. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But what he didn't count on was that betrayal doesn't just break people. Sometimes it awakens a fury, a strength, and a revenge so sharp it leaves scars no one forgets. My name is Stacy. I'm 40 years old, and if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be sitting here recounting this kind of story, I probably would have smiled politely, shaken my head, and told you were crazy. I thought my life was simple back then, even ordinary. I was a mom of 2 daughters, married to a man I thought was flawed but good-hearted. And we lived in a house that, while not perfect, was ours. I thought loyalty and hard work would protect me from the kind of devastation that belongs in soap operas or the tabloids. But real life has a way of blindsiding you, of handing you scripts so twisted you almost can't believe you're the one living them. I met Mark when I was 22, back when the world still felt wide open, like every choice could only lead to something better. He was 25, confident in a way that both thrilled and intimidated me. He had this grin, this mischievous spark in his eyes that made you think he knew secrets about the world no one else did. Back then, I confused charm with substance. I thought a man who could make me laugh until my stomach hurt would also be the man who would protect me, stand by me, and fight for me when life got hard. I couldn't have been more wrong. Mark had big dreams, always. He wanted to start a restaurant. Then he wanted to launch a construction company, then a landscaping business, and later it was some vague talk about investing in tech startups. It was exhausting sometimes, but in those early days, I admired his ambition. I thought it meant he wanted more for us, for our future children. I was raised in a family where stability mattered more than sparkle, so his hunger for more felt intoxicating. But there's a fine line between ambition and recklessness. And Mark didn't just cross it, he sprinted past it. Our daughters, Emma and Lily, were the best parts of my life. Emma was the cautious one, book-smart, the kind of kid who would rather stay up late finishing a novel than go out to a party. She wanted to be a doctor from the time she was 7. Lily, on the other hand, was a firecracker, bold, loud, artistic, and full of energy. She dreamed about going to New York for art school. They were so different, yet both of them carried pieces of me in their smiles, in their stubborn streaks, in the way they held on to hope, even when life gave them reasons not to. From the day Emma was born, I made a promise to myself. I would give them the kind of foundation I never had. College wasn't negotiable. It was their ticket to something better, to the kind of independence I hadn't felt until much later in life. Mark and I didn't make much money in those years, but I saved every bonus, every tax return, every bit of side income I could scrounge up. I tucked away into a college fund. I opened a separate account in my name. I thought if I built this safety net, nothing could take it away from them. I should have known better. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of ordinary day where you don't expect your entire life to tilt sideways. I had just gotten home from work, juggling grocery bags and keys, when Emma asked me if I could transfer some money into her account to cover a fee for a pre-college summer program she wanted to apply to. "It's just $50, Mom," she said, "but they want it submitted online." Of course, I told her, setting the bags down on the counter. "Let me check the account after dinner." Dinner was spaghetti, nothing fancy, but Emma and Lily loved it. Mark came in late, smelling faintly of whiskey, loosening his tie with that same too-wide grin I had learned to dread. "Good news," he announced, kissing my cheek quickly. "Big opportunities are coming. Just wait." The girls exchanged a glance, and my stomach twisted. I knew that look. It was the same look I'd had years ago when I still believed him. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat down at the computer with Emma's request still fresh in my mind. I logged into the college fund account, the one I had guarded for years like a hawk. My fingers froze on the keyboard when I saw the balance. It should have been in the tens of thousands. Instead, it was barely 3 digits. My chest tightened. I refreshed the page, convinced I had typed something wrong, but the numbers didn't change. I scrolled through the transaction history, my hands shaking. Transfers, all recent, all in Mark's name, over and over, withdrawals funneling out like a leak in a dam. My first reaction was disbelief. Surely, there was an explanation. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe he had moved it somewhere safe. Maybe, but I already knew. I knew Mark too well. He had taken it. Not just money, not just savings. He had taken the very thing I had sacrificed for. The dreams I had built for our girls, their future. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was on my feet, pacing the room, my heart racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. Rage bubbled up inside me, hot and raw. For years, I had tolerated his failures, his excuses, his empty promises. But this was different. This wasn't about us anymore. This was about Emma and Lily, about the hours I had worked, the nights I had gone without, the hope I had clung to so they wouldn't have to live the same cycle I had. He had stolen from them. When Mark came out of the shower, humming to himself, I was waiting. The laptop sat open on the bed, the numbers glaring in the dim light. "What did you do?" My voice shook, but not from weakness, from fury. He froze, towel in hand, his face paling as his eyes flicked to the screen. "Stacy, I can explain." "Explain." I snapped. "You emptied their college fund. You stole from your daughters. You took everything we've saved for them and threw it into whatever fantasy you've cooked up this time." His jaw clenched. "It's not like that. It's an investment. A sure thing." I had to act fast, and you had to act fast. I cut him off. "So fast you couldn't talk to me. So fast you couldn't think about Emma, about Lily, about what this money was for. They're kids," he shouted, his face red now. "They've got their whole lives ahead of them. This is for all of us. Stacy, when it pays off, they'll thank me. And if it doesn't," I whispered, my throat tight. "What then, Mark? What do I tell them when they can't go to the schools they've dreamed about, when every sacrifice I made was for nothing?" He looked away, silent. And that silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. That night, something inside me shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't throw him out. I didn't collapse in tears. I went quiet, because I realized that the man I had built my life with was not just unreliable, he was dangerous, not in the way of fists or violence, but in the way of selfishness so profound it devoured everything in its path. I slept in the guest room that night, or rather, I laid there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every memory of his charm, every promise he had made, every time I had covered for him, forgave him, carried him, replayed in my head like a cruel montage. I thought about Emma's face when she got her acceptance letters, about Lily sketching late into the night, dreaming of art school, and I thought about the emptiness in that account. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let him dictate the end of this story. No, I was going to take it back. Not just the money, but my power, my dignity, my daughter's future, and Mark. He was going to learn that when you betray a mother's children, you don't just make a mistake, you make an enemy. The morning after I discovered the money was gone, I felt like I was walking through fog. The girls were rushing around, packing lunches and grabbing books, and I plastered a smile on my face so they wouldn't notice the way my insides were crumbling. Emma asked me if I'd managed to transfer the fee for her program yet, and I forced myself to say I'd take care of it that afternoon. My voice didn't even crack, though my heart felt like it was breaking. Lily was busy chattering about her art teacher, praising her latest sketch, and I nodded in all the right places, trying to anchor myself in their laughter. I couldn't let them see it yet. I couldn't let them know their father had stolen their dreams. Mark acted like nothing had happened. He kissed the girls goodbye, promised them a weekend trip soon, and left with a smile on his face. Watching him walk out that door as though he hadn't detonated a bomb in our lives made something inside me twist into steel. For years, I'd been silent. For years, I'd carried his mistakes, smoothed his rough edges, covered his failures. Not anymore. The first thing I did was start looking through paperwork. Every drawer, every file, every envelope he'd hidden at the back of cabinets. I wanted to know what he'd really done with the money, and the more I uncovered, the worse it got. It wasn't just one investment. He'd spread it out. Risky startups, some shady cryptocurrency scheme, even handing over chunks of it to a so-called friend who had a history of failed ventures himself. It wasn't just reckless, it was insane. I wanted to confront him again, to scream, to demand he fix it, but what good would that do? He'd already shown me who he was, and deep down, I knew there was no fixing this. Mark wasn't going to wake up one morning and turn into the husband I had always needed. He wasn't going to magically put the girls first. That night, while he slept, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen. For years I had thought of myself as a woman just trying to survive, just trying to keep things afloat. But now, I was someone else, someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. I started writing lists, plans, ideas. If he thought he could steal from me and the girls, he was going to learn what it felt like to lose everything. The hardest part was keeping it from Emma and Lily. They noticed my quietness, the way I stayed up late, the way I checked my phone constantly. Emma asked me one night if something was wrong. I looked at her wide brown eyes, so much like mine, and I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't. Not yet, not until I had a way to fix it. I couldn't let them carry the weight of knowing their father wasn't the man they thought he was. Mark started coming home later and later. He claimed he was meeting investors or networking, but I knew better. Sometimes he smelled like alcohol, sometimes like perfume that wasn't mine. I didn't even have the energy to confront him about that. Not when the bigger betrayal loomed so large. It wasn't just about another woman. It was about his selfishness. His willingness to gamble his daughter's futures for his own ego. I began talking quietly to people I trusted, not about Mark, not yet, but about opportunities. A friend from work mentioned a community scholarship program Emma could apply for, and I wrote down every detail. I contacted the bank about freezing joint accounts so he couldn't drain anything else without my knowledge. I even reached out to a lawyer, just to know my options. It felt dangerous, like sneaking around in my own life, but it also felt powerful. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to Mark's chaos, I was planning my own moves. One night, I heard him on the phone in the garage. His voice was low, urgent, almost desperate. "I'll get it," he was saying. "Just give me a little more time. I've got a deal coming through. Big money. You'll get your cut." I froze, my hand on the doorknob, my stomach turning. It wasn't just bad investments. He was in debt, serious debt, and he was using our daughter's future to dig himself deeper into the hole. I backed away quietly, my heart pounding. That was the night I decided I wasn't just going to take the girls and leave. I was going to make sure Mark learned what it felt like to lose control. I was going to hit him where it hurt. I started with information. If there's one thing I'd learned working in admin all these years, it's that paper trails tell the truth people try to hide. I dug into his emails, his bank statements, even his texts when he left his phone unattended. What I found was a web of lies so tangled I almost couldn't believe it. He wasn't just stealing from us, he was lying to friends, to business partners, even to people who thought they were helping him. He was drowning in loans, in promises he couldn't keep. The more I read, the angrier I became. But anger wasn't enough anymore. I wanted justice. I wanted revenge. And I wanted my daughters to see that when someone tries to take everything from you, you don't crumble, you fight back. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mark announced one night, out of the blue, that he wanted us to host a dinner. Big opportunity, he said, eyes gleaming. Some investors are interested, and I want them to see the whole package. The house, the family, the stability. You'll play your part, right, Stacy? I smiled, sweet and sharp. Of course. Inside, my mind was already spinning. If he wanted to show off his perfect life, I would make sure the cracks were impossible to ignore. The night of the dinner, I wore a dress I hadn't put on in years, one that made me feel powerful. Emma and Lily helped set the table, and Mark buzzed around like a showman, rehearsing his pitches under his breath. The investors arrived, slick suits and fake smiles, and Mark turned on his charm like a switch. He bragged about his ventures, about his supportive wife, about his bright daughters. He painted a picture so flawless it almost made me sick. When dessert was served, I excused myself to the kitchen, but instead of grabbing plates, I grabbed my phone. I had already forwarded key emails, documents, and texts to myself, proof of his debts, his lies, his theft. With one click, I sent them anonymously to one of the investors, a man I knew had a reputation for being ruthless when crossed. It didn't take long. Halfway through Mark's speech about long-term growth, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at Mark, then at me. His smile disappeared. The dinner ended in chaos. The investors left abruptly, muttering excuses. Mark was furious, pacing the living room, shouting about sabotage. I stayed calm, almost serene. Watching him unravel felt like the first sip of water after years of thirst. He demanded to know if I knew anything. I just looked at him and said, "Maybe people are finally starting to see the truth." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. And I knew I was just getting started. I used to think silence was weakness, that if you didn't shout or scream or demand answers, you were letting someone win. But in those weeks after the investors stormed out of our house, I learned that silence can be a weapon sharper than knives. Mark had no idea what I had done, no idea how much I already knew. He paced the house like a caged animal, snapping at the girls, blaming me for being cold at dinner, accusing me of somehow ruining his chances. I let him rant. I let him dig his hole deeper, because every word, every excuse, every time he raised his voice, Emma and Lily saw him more clearly. I didn't need to expose him yet. He was doing it himself. But the girls weren't stupid. Emma came to me one night, her face serious, her voice low. "Mom, what's going on? Dad's been acting weird. And you're different too. Are you too?" She trailed off, not wanting to say the word. I reached for her hand, squeezing it. "Your dad is making choices I don't agree with, but I promise you, I'm not going to let those choices hurt you or your sister." Her eyes searched mine. She was 16, on the edge of adulthood. Smart enough to see the cracks, but still young enough to want to believe things would work out. "Is it about money?" she asked finally. My throat tightened. She was too perceptive. I wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine, but I couldn't. Not when the truth was staring us all in the face. "Yes," I admitted softly. "But don't worry, I'm handling it." She nodded, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. That night, after she went upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen, realizing that shielding them from the truth was no longer possible. If Mark kept unraveling, they'd find out anyway. Maybe it was better they knew sooner. Not the full story. Not yet, but enough to see him for who he really was. Mark, of course, didn't slow down. If anything, he grew more desperate. He started taking calls at all hours, slipping out of the house in the middle of the night with flimsy excuses, coming back reeking of alcohol. One morning, I found his car parked crooked in the driveway, a scrape along the side, and when I asked what happened, he brushed it off as nothing. But the look in his eyes told me everything. He was spiraling. I began preparing in earnest. I met with the lawyer again, this time serious about divorce. I started moving money quietly into an account in my name only, small amounts he wouldn't notice. I talked to Emma about scholarships, about alternative ways to pay for college, framing it as extra opportunities rather than necessity. Lily overheard us once and asked if something was wrong, but Emma jumped in, distracting her with a joke. And my heart ached with pride and sorrow all at once. My daughters were protecting each other from the truth I wished they didn't have to face. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Mark had promised to take the girls out for lunch, some family bonding time to make up for his absences. They waited by the door, dressed and ready, while I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean. An hour passed. Then two. Emma finally slumped onto the couch, her face set in a grim line. Lily tried to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. When he finally stumbled in at dusk, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, Lily's face crumpled. "You forgot us," she whispered. "I didn't forget," he snapped, too harshly. "Something came up. You'll survive." The silence in the room was deafening. Emma stood, her voice steady but shaking at the edges. "We waited for you all day. You can't keep doing this." He glared at her, about to retort, but I stepped in. "Enough." My voice was sharper than it had ever been. "You don't get to talk to her like that. Not anymore." For a moment, his mouth opened and closed, like he wanted to argue, but the fire in my eyes must have stopped him. He stormed upstairs instead, slamming the door. That night, I sat Emma and Lily down. The words burned on my tongue, but I knew it was time. "There's something you need to know," I began. "Your father has been careless with money. The college fund, the one I've been saving for you, it's gone. He used it for things he shouldn't have." Lily gasped, tears springing to her eyes. Emma just sat there, silent, her face pale. "Gone?" she asked finally. "Yes," I said, my own voice breaking. "But listen to me, we will figure this out. I will make sure you both get the futures you deserve. I promise you that." For the first time, I saw anger in Emma's eyes, raw and sharp. "He did this. He stole from us." I nodded. She stood, pacing the room, her hands clenched. "I can't believe him. All those years you worked, all those sacrifices, and he just..." She shook her head, too furious to finish. Lily sobbed quietly, curling into me, and I held her close. In that moment, something shifted in both of them. They weren't little girls anymore. They saw their father not as a hero, not even as flawed, but as someone who had betrayed them. And once you see someone that way, you can never go back. From that day forward, the girls became my allies. Emma started helping me research scholarships and grants, digging into programs with the kind of determination only she could muster. Lily threw herself into her art, channeling her anger into every stroke of her pencil, every splash of paint. We became a unit, me and them, while Mark drifted further to the outside. But revenge is a slow burn. And I wasn't done yet. One evening, while Mark was out, I sat at the computer with Emma by my side. Together, we combed through his emails, piecing together just how deep his lies went. Emma's jaw tightened with every new discovery. "He owes people money," she muttered. "Serious money. Mom, this isn't just about us. He's in trouble." I nodded. "I know. That's why we have to be smart. If he won't protect us, we'll protect ourselves. Lily wandered in, curious, and Emma quickly shut the laptop, but I saw the fire in her eyes too. She might have been younger, but she wasn't blind. She started asking more questions, pushing me for details, and I realized that maybe the best way to protect them wasn't by hiding the truth, but by preparing them for it. The more we learned, the clearer it became that Mark wasn't going to change. He was too far gone, too consumed by his schemes and debts. And if we didn't act soon, he might drag us down with him, so we started planning. The three of us together. I told the girls about my meetings with the lawyer, about the steps I was taking to secure money in my name only. Emma suggested ways to track his spending, using apps and alerts. Lily even offered to sell some of her art to contribute, her chin lifted proudly. My heart broke and swelled at the same time. They shouldn't have had to carry this burden, but they weren't victims. They were fighters, just like me. The night I knew our plan was truly set in motion came when Mark stumbled in drunk. Muttering about one last deal that would fix everything, he collapsed on the couch, his phone slipping from his hand. Emma picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she read the messages flashing across the screen. She looked at me, her voice steady. "Mom, he's meeting someone tomorrow, someone dangerous." I took the phone from her, my blood running cold. The texts were clear. Threats, ultimatums, promises of violence if debts weren't repaid. For the first time, I felt fear. Not for myself, but for my daughters. Mark had crossed a line that could put us all in danger. But fear can be fuel, and as I sat there, Emma and Lily beside me, I realized that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival, and I would do whatever it took to make sure we survived. The night everything finally came apart felt both sudden and inevitable. Like a pot left on a slow flame until it finally boiled over. For months I had been threading tiny, careful moves together, quiet banking changes, whispered meetings with a lawyer, late nights combing through Mark's emails with Emma, phone calls to people I barely trusted. It had been a study in patience and planning, and when the moment came to flip the switch, I did it with the kind of cold focus that surprised even me. The day before, Mark had been frantic, more slippery than a man used to drowning in his own schemes. He'd taken a loan meeting that morning and come home pale and wired, arms trembling as though his bones had been drained. He muttered about terms and collectors, and some man named Vargas who didn't like being promised things that never arrived. When he thought I wasn't looking, he thumbed through a small envelope of cash and then shoved it into a sock drawer like some teenager hoarding contraband. I watched him, silent. He thought I couldn't see the desperation in his hands, the way he avoided looking me in the eye. He thought we were back in the days when I smoothed over his messes. He thought wrong. That night I called the person I had spoken with months before. The agent at the state attorney's office who had taken an interest in the pattern of small frauds and shaky investments in our county. I didn't tell them everything, just the breadcrumbs that would lead them where I needed them to go. I sent the copies of the transactions I'd found to the email address I'd been given. And I flagged certain names and shell companies I'd discovered in Mark's files. Doing it felt oddly sacred, like tucking a child into bed with a promise that tomorrow would be safer. What I didn't tell them was the plan that followed. The bait. Vargas, the collector, had been texting Mark like a metronome, threats that escalated quickly to promises of violence if debts weren't repaid. I learned Vargas's habits from a neighborhood feed and by following a comment thread from a local mechanic who had seen him in a bar. He liked bravado and he liked an audience. So I made the audience. The night Mark was to meet Vargas, I texted him an anonymous tip. Well-timed to a local small newspaper reporter who I'd quietly been feeding for weeks. The reporter did what they always do. They lit a phone and a camera and started walking toward a story that smelled of corruption and danger. I also made sure there were eyes on Vargas that night that weren't just the reporters. Friend from the nursery school bored someone who owed me a favor because I had once helped her organize a fundraiser, agreed to bring her husband, who ran security at a nearby mall. He would be in plain clothes, another set of eyes. I'd lined up witnesses like dominoes. It felt reckless and brilliant at once. When Mark left that night, he thought he was going to cut a deal, not realizing he was walking into his own undoing. He met Vargas in a parking lot behind a closed restaurant. Phone clenched, wallet out. The classic posture of a man offering the last of what he had to stay afloat. The reporter watched from a safe distance through a cracked car window. Vargas did what Vargas does. He tried to make a show of it, a threat, a little performance to scare Mark into paying more. But the reporter's camera captured every word. Mark's face on the footage was pale and ashamed. Not angry and slick as it had been in my memory. It wasn't just the footage that mattered, it was the timing. As Vargas was counting bills, a squad car pulled up because the reporter had called ahead with the registration of the car they'd seen earlier that was known to be used by local collectors. It turned out Vargas had a rap sheet and a probation officer who'd been monitoring him for months. Probabilistic policing, I suppose, came into alignment with my attempts at justice. He was detained that night and escorted away in cuffs, and Mark was left standing in a puddle of shame and gasoline smell. His plans collapsing. The reporter's piece hit the morning cycle like a blowtorch. Photos, quotes, video snippets. Mark was the lead story in our county paper. The headline was clinical and merciless in equal measure. Local entrepreneur, tangled with collector. Investigation broadens. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. When Mark read it, he collapsed into a chair, hands over his face, shaking. I sat across from him and felt neither pity nor triumph, only a hard, clean sense of reality. This was the man I'd been living with. He'd brought the predators to our doorstep. In the days that followed, attorneys called, bank managers called, emails pinged my inbox that I'd set on alert. I had done what I could to separate our money transfers into a hidden account in my name, emergency access funds, scholarship applications for Emma and Lily that weren't just hopeful but smart and tied to professionals who could vouch. The lawyer I'd been meeting with helped me draft a temporary restraining order and a motion for emergency custody of certain assets on behalf of the girls' college fund. I was careful to do it by the book. Vengeance without legal clarity can be nothing but trouble. At the same time, I needed irrefutable proof of Mark's theft, not just the money vanishing and Vargas's theatrics. I had that, too. Hidden in his habit of tossing receipts into the trash were bank transfer confirmations and emails to the friend who'd taken the largest chunk. I'd printed them, cataloged them, and notarized them with the kind of care that made me feel like a woman who could move mountains. The prosecutor took them seriously. He called me in, looked me in the eye, and said, "You did the right thing bringing this to us." It wasn't flattering. It was everything I needed to hear. Mark's reaction was predictably spiraling. He tried to gaslight his way out of everything. He told the girls when he could find a pretense to speak to them alone that I had overreacted, that I was trying to steal his dreams from him. He texted neighbors, claiming I was unstable. He posted something on social media that painted him as a devoted father getting back on his feet. A man wronged by a scheming wife. I think he believed for a minute that charm would salvage him. But the images in the paper, the statements from investors who called our house in a panic, the subpoena from a court clerk, those things drowned his charisma. People who had once smiled at him in cocktail bars avoided his gaze. And there was another piece of my plan playing out quietly. The girls themselves. I knew two things about Emma and Lily that made me proud and affirmed my strategy. 1, they were smarter than I gave them credit for at times. And 2, they were quietly brave. Instead of sheltering them from the world, I had been empowering them, showing them how to read financial statements in the evenings, how to identify scholarship forms, how to call a counselor and ask for help. The difference between victimhood and agency is knowledge, and I gave them that knowledge. When the prosecutor called to say they were ready to indict, I felt a mixture of vindication and grief. It wasn't purely joyful. This was my family, after all, but it was necessary. Mark was arrested, briefly, on charges of grand theft and fraud. The arrest was not violent. It was procedural. He waved at some neighbor from the back of the police cruiser like the camera was another cocktail party. I watched through the blinds and felt nothing like the man in the back of that car assumed I would. Instead of vindication, there was a hollow, an exhausted recognition that my life had been reshaped in a way I could never have foreseen. His court dates became a cruel parade. The local news rehashed every bit of the story. I sat in the gallery one day and listened to an investigator recount that Mark had used the college fund as collateral for a string of unsecured loans, had wired money overseas to people who promised returns he never saw, and had siphoned cash through an account held by someone he'd called a brother. The defense attorneys licked and practiced argued that Mark was a good man beset by bad luck and that he'd meant to repay every dime. It was almost laughable to hear it. The evidence was a paper trail as long as a scroll. During the trial, there were awkward, painful moments. The girls had to testify about things they didn't entirely understand yet. Emma, so dignified, took the stand with the kind of composure that made me simultaneously proud and heartbroken. She spoke, lucid and brave, about how she had helped her mother with scholarship applications. Because we had to try. Lily was smaller on the stand, but honest in the way only 14-year-olds can be. She drew pictures in the waiting room because art was how she processed anger. and she had scribbled images of empty piggy banks. Their testimony cut through the husk of Mark's excuses. The jury listened like people hearing a morality play made real. There were twists, too, of course. Mark's lawyers tried to pin blame on me, suggesting I had mismanaged funds or allowed other people access, implying collusion where there was none. They called a character witness, a woman from Mark's erstwhile investment group, who painted him as visionary and me as vindictive. The courtroom spit with the kind of tension you can only feel in rooms where livelihoods are folded like paper. But for every attempt to muddy the waters, the prosecutor had more documents, more bank statements, more witness testimony. The scale tipped, slowly, and then decisively, toward accountability. On the day the verdict came down, I sat with Emma and Lily in their favorite cafe, the one that smelled of cinnamon and cardamom, and held their hands. We had tried to create as much normalcy as we could: movie nights, homework help, dinners that tasted like stability, but underneath it all was the knowledge that the future had been pulled out from under us and that we had rebuilt it brick by brick. The jury's decision was not a magical cure, it was a legal acknowledgement of a wound. When the foreperson stood and said guilty, the sound hit me in the gut, but it also loosened something pent-tight inside my chest. Mark was sentenced to restitution and community service, and the judge ordered that his assets be liquidated to repay what remained possible. The college fund was partially recovered, not all of it, because some of the money could not be traced and some of it was already gone into accounts that had been wiped, but enough to salvage scholarship packages for both girls. I negotiated with Emma's program directors and with contacts at Lily's art conservatory. I'd done the work, called in favors, written persuasive proofs of need. We didn't have the life we had imagined, but we had possibilities, and that, in and of itself, felt like a small miracle. After the courtroom drama cooled, the real quieter work began. The healing. I remember the first morning I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table without glancing toward Mark's side of the house, where his tools still lay in a dusty corner. It felt odd to breathe in a space not punctuated by the worry of his next scheme. I took the kids to school that day and walked away from the car with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't freedom from pain. Grief for what had been lost sat in my ribs like a small stone, but rather a clarity I hadn't known was possible, the knowledge that I could steer my own life. We went to counseling. Emma saw a college advisor who taught her how to apply for scholarships that would give her a real shot at her dreams. Lily took an advanced art class and sold her first painting at a local show. A small canvas of a red umbrella that fetched more than we expected. We celebrated those wins the way people celebrate oxygen after being underwater, gasping, grateful, astonished. I also found a small community group of women who had been through betrayals of many kinds: financial, emotional, legal. We met over casseroles and coffee and traded stories like lifelines. There were small cruelties, little barbs from people who either assumed too much or wanted to be cruel for sport. A neighbor who once borrowed sugar now crossed the street when she saw me. A woman at the PTA made a pointed remark about marital trouble as though our pain was gossip fodder. Those things stung for a second and then dissolved under the brighter reality. Emma's acceptance letter arrived the following spring with a scholarship package that covered most tuition, and Lily got a summer residency with a gallery downtown. Watching them walk into the future, walking with heads up, made the cheap comments of strangers evaporate. Mark is a shadow now in our lives. He sends a postcard on birthdays, perfunctory and apologetic, as though an economy of words could bridge the years of betrayal. I toss most of them. Once, on a day when I felt small and tired, I opened one and read a string of sentences about how sorry he was, how he'd learned his lesson. I put it on the kitchen table, and then burned it in the yard. The smoke smelled like an old life dissolving. I won't pretend the aftermath was tidy. Legal restitution didn't replace every withdrawn dollar. There were nights I lay awake, counting bills and worrying about the unexpected. Some days, I still felt guilt, irrational pangs, that maybe, if I had noticed sooner, things would be different. But the fierce truth that buoyed me was this: I had stood up. I had looked betrayal in the eye, and chosen me and my daughters over the easy script of forgiveness that would let him walk away. I rebuilt in small ways. I took a job with a nonprofit that supported first-generation college students, because nothing in me wanted another family to go through what we had. The work was humbling and filled me in ways dollars never had. I started teaching a little workshop with Emma on budgeting for art students because she wanted to help others learn what she'd nearly lost. Lily and I painted a mural at the community center, a burst of color that made passers-by smile on the gray corner of our town. Sometimes, when everything is quiet and the house hums with late-night appliances and far-off traffic, I think about what it means to be a mother. It is, in part, to protect and to fight. It is to move like a shadow across the ledger lines of life, correcting where things have been wronged. The worst thing Mark did, worse than the money he took, was teach me how fragile our safety nets can be. The best thing that came after was learning the limits of my endurance and where to draw lines I would not let anyone cross. I don't know what the future will hold. If Emma will fall in love with someone who makes the same mistakes. If Lily will find critics who are kinder than some of the comments she hears. I don't know if Mark will ever really change. But I know this: we are moving forward. We are building again with the careful hands of people who have learned how to measure bricks properly. To lay foundations that don't depend on the whims of others. There is a kind of beauty to that, a strange, stubborn grace. If there is one thing I would tell another woman who finds herself in my shoes, it's this: sheltering your children by silence does not always protect them. Sometimes it keeps them in the dark long enough for the damage to grow. Speak to someone you trust. Get the paperwork. Learn to read the accounts. Be patient and strategic, because there are battles you will win, not with shouting, but with steady, relentless action. And when you must, light the match. Do it carefully, but do it. The day I signed the final papers that sealed the restitution and the court case closed, Emma and Lily were with me. We went out for pancakes after, laughed about nothing and everything. Lily doodled on the corner of the napkin a small umbrella and handed it to me. For protection, she said, grinning. I folded it into my wallet and felt, for the first time in a long time, a calm certainty. Whatever storms come, the three of us will weather them together.